It was a chilly night in early March a few years ago. The kind of night that carries a deep silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze or the distant hum of a car engine. I had just gotten home from work, the kind of workday that drags on far too long. It was close to midnight by the time I walked through the door, and I was beyond exhausted. My mind buzzed with the stress of the day, and all I could think about was cracking open a cold beer, sinking into the couch, and letting the world slip away for a while. I didn't even bother turning on the TV at first. I just sank into the cushions, feet up, eyes closed. The house was quiet, a peaceful solitude that felt like a balm to my frazzled nerves. For a few moments, I tried to clear my head, to forget about the deadlines, the meetings, the endless to-do list that awaited me the next day. I could feel the tension melting away, my body starting to relax, but my mind still wouldn't stop racing. I picked up the remote and began flipping through the channels, but everything seemed as unappealing as my thoughts. The world outside the house felt distant, irrelevant. I just wanted to be still. So, I sat there in the dim light, sipping the beer in silence, listening to the faint creaks of the house settling. And then, in an instant, everything changed. The house plunged into darkness. There was a faint popping sound, like a light bulb being unscrewed from its socket, followed by the soft hum of nothingness. My heart skipped a beat. The power had gone out. Again, it wasn't an unusual occurrence. Our old house had a tendency to lose power every now and then, usually when the wind picked up or the weather got rough. It was an inconvenience, nothing more. I sighed and stood up, moving toward the front door to step outside and see if the neighbors had lost power too. As I walked to the door, I glanced around. The faint glow from the streetlights outside filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the living room. The house felt colder, emptier. I grabbed the doorknob, expecting the usual click of the lock, but nothing. The handle didn't budge. Confused, I tried again, thinking maybe I had missed a turn or misjudged the lock. But it didn't move. I tugged harder and still nothing. The door was locked, but I hadn't locked it. My mind started racing. What was going on? Panic crept in as I moved to the back door. Maybe I had accidentally locked it earlier in the day. But when I grabbed the knob, it too refused to budge. It was locked, and it wasn't like this house to lock itself. I was certain I hadn't locked it. I tried to steady my breath, pushing the rising anxiety aside. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was overreacting. But something didn't feel right. My pulse quickened. I had to check the breaker. I ran to the utility room, where the circuit breaker panel was, and threw open the door. Everything seemed normal at first glance. But then I noticed something strange. My coiled hose, which I always left neatly next to the wall, was lying in the grass outside the panel. The heavy coil of rubber was twisted and askew, like someone had yanked it out and thrown it carelessly aside. A sick realization hit me all at once. Someone had cut the power intentionally. My stomach dropped. I turned back toward the house, dread beginning to bubble up in my chest. I needed to get inside, to check on my wife, to make sure she was safe. I quickly moved to the front window, trying to peer inside. That's when I saw them. Two figures, their movements jerky and hurried, flashing the beams of flashlights around inside my house. They were searching through my things, tossing furniture aside, rummaging through drawers. My heart pounded in my chest. My first instinct was to call the police, but I froze as I reached into my pocket, my phone. It wasn't there. My mind spun as I turned and sprinted back toward the house. I could feel my feet pounding against the ground, a primal panic taking over. I couldn't call the police. I had left my phone on the couch. I couldn't wait for help to arrive. Not when my wife was inside. Vulnerable. I had to act fast. In a flash, I grabbed a few rocks from the driveway and began throwing them at our bedroom window. The rocks made a sharp, cracking sound as they hit the glass. I didn't care about the damage. All that mattered was getting her attention. And it worked. I saw her silhouette appear at the window, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. She looked at me, confusion written on her face, her eyes wide in shock. I motioned for her to get down, to hide. I whispered her name, urging her to listen, to move. She nodded, disappearing from the window without a word. Relief surged through me for a split second before the gravity of the situation came crashing back. I turned and ran to my neighbor's house. My breaths were coming in sharp gasps, but I didn't stop. I pounded on his door, almost frantic. He opened it, blinking at me in confusion. "Call the police," I gasped, barely able to get the words out. "There are burglars in my house. They have a gun. Please." He didn't ask questions, just nodded and rushed inside to grab his phone. I ran back to the house, pacing, watching the front door, my eyes darting over every shadow, every movement. The wait felt like hours, though it could have been just minutes. By the time the police arrived, the burglars were gone. They had taken what they could: my wife's jewelry, my father's old watch, the cash hidden in the drawer. But they had taken more than just belongings. They had taken my peace of mind, my sense of security. My wife, though unharmed, had heard everything. She told me later that one of them had entered our bedroom, and she had heard the click of a gun being cocked. "Were you coming?" she asked, her voice small, almost a whisper. "I heard the rocks, but I didn't know if you'd make it." I could still hear the terror in her voice. The idea of her alone in that room, knowing someone was there, was something that would haunt me forever. The police scoured the house, but there was nothing. No trace of the intruders. They had vanished as quickly as they had come, leaving nothing but a broken window and a hollow emptiness in their wake. We didn't get much sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every decision I had made. I couldn't shake the image of my wife, terrified and alone, waiting for me to rescue her. "I'll never forgive myself," I muttered into the dark. She reached over, placing her hand on mine. "You did everything you could, but it didn't feel like enough." It never would. The next day, the sun rose, bringing light to the quiet house. The tension from the night before hung in the air, but we were safe. We were together. And maybe that was the only thing that really mattered in the end. The burglars had taken our things, but they hadn't taken us. And for that, I was grateful.